Despite loving both the sci-fi and fantasy genres, fantasy has always been the favoured child in my eyes. So it may come as no surprise, but when it comes to the Metroidvania genre, I've always felt more kinship with the Vania side of the equation. This is mainly due to Symphony of the Night, a PlayStation 1 classic that I fell in love with. In 2018, Konami released a port of the Dracula X Chronicles called Castlevania Requiem that had Rondo of Blood and Symphony of the Night inside them, but with added trophies. And since then, they have ported the Game Boy Advance games in the Advance Collection, and now, finally, the DS games have been ported to the PlayStation 5 in the Dominus Collection. This collection consists of 3 games, Dawn of Sorrow, Portrait of Ruin, and Order of Ecclesia, and it rounds out the last of the 2D Castlevania games being ported to modern consoles. So, how well have games that came out 20 years ago on the Nintendo DS fared on a modern gaming tech? Have they fared well in its transformation from 2 tiny screens into one? And have they held up despite their age, or are they just all miserable little piles of secrets? Let's find out. Firstly, let's talk about the Dominus Collection as a whole, and what it offers and improves on over the 3 games' original releases. The main thing is how cleverly the game has translated what used to be 2 screens worth of information into one. The main gameplay screen takes up about 2/3 of the screen, whereas the remaining third shows you your map and your status. You can shift the placement of all of these around a little, switching the order of them, or even opting for the old dual screen setup if you really want to. I really like this change, mostly as it meant I could always see where I was without having to open the map, and where I had to go back to explore. The touchpad functionality has been replicated by using a combination of the right stick and the right trigger button, or the DualSense's touchpad, but I rarely found that I needed to use these, thankfully, apart from in a few parts of Dawn of Sorrow. The games all look just as stunning as they did originally, with the pixel work still looking as beautiful and detailed as it did 20 years ago. And you can see the visuals improve as you play through all of the games in order, with Order of Ecclesia being a particularly visual treat, showcasing some of the best sprite work the series has ever had to offer. The collection also offers some nice quality of life additions in the game, that you can bring up at any time with the left trigger button. In this menu, you can save or load the game wherever you are, and you can also look through the game's compendiums for enemy information or other things. You can also rewind time by about 30 seconds or so if you need to by holding down the left trigger. This is actually really useful for farming enemies for their drops in all 3 games, as it seems like the drop is calculated when the enemy dies. However, I didn't find abusing this too necessary for farming, and it did make things a bit boring. The main menu, where you decide which game you want to load into, offers an array of cool extras too, like concept art from each of the games, and the ability to listen to any of the songs from each of the incredible soundtracks the trilogy has. There are also 2 bonus games in this collection: Haunted Castle, an arcade game from 1988, and Haunted Castle Revisited, a much improved version of the same game. So, with all of these additions and improvements in mind, let's get to the heart of the Dominus Collection, the 3DS games themselves. Dawn of Sorrow was originally released in 2005 and is the direct sequel to the Game Boy Advance title Aria of Sorrow. Taking place a year later, you return to the role of Soma Cruz, a young man who has the ability to absorb the souls of monsters and command them. Threatened by a cult looking to resurrect Dracula, Soma must fight his way through a copy of the Dark Lord's castle to stop them. Aria of Sorrow is probably my second favourite game in the series after Symphony of the Night, and although Dawn never reaches the same heights, it is still brilliant. Soma's tactical soul ability is still incredibly cool and fun to experiment with. The way this works is that almost every enemy in the game can drop its soul for Soma to equip, and all of these fall into 3 different categories. Bullet souls, which are Soma's sub-weapons like throwable bones or axes, Guardian souls that drain MP while being used, and are used for things like transformations or summons, and enchantment souls, which are equipable buffs that don't cost any MP. You can equip one of each type of soul, and once you have unlocked the ability to, you can switch between 2 different sets of equipment, which lets you be a bit more prepared for whatever enemy weaknesses or bosses you come across or situations you might need them in. It's still an inventive and interesting system, and just like in Aria, I appreciated the amount of variety there is in the game for you to choose between. Different weapon combinations with different souls can lead to some really fun but broken combos. The biggest issue with the system is how abysmally low the drop rate is for most of the souls, and even if all of the ones you need to progress are guaranteed drops, finding ones that are actually good to use in combat can be a chore. And although the game isn't particularly hard, if you want to have an easier time with many of the bosses, you will want to farm some of the better souls like the Mandragora one. You can also use the souls to upgrade weapons to more powerful versions, which again would be a lot more fun and interesting if you didn't have to spend so long farming. Dawn of Sorrow is the only game in the collection to actually try and utilise the touchscreen options. In the original, when you defeated bosses, you would need to trace a magical seal on the bottom screen with your stylus or your fingernail. Obviously, this isn't possible right now, so instead the seal can either be drawn using a QTE button sequence or by using the right analog stick, although why you would want to torture yourself with the second option is beyond me. The second title, Portrait of Ruin, originally released in 2006, and it mixes things up in the gameplay department by letting you switch between two playable characters, the vampire hunter Jonathan Morris and the spellcaster Charlotte Orlin, who travels to Dracula's castle in 1944 to stop a vampire artist named Browner from unleashing the dark power of the castle on the world. Jonathan, although not technically a Belmont, plays just like one, and has access to a whole host of different weapons and sub-weapons that you can level up and become more effective with use. Charlotte, on the other hand, is a magic user who has access to many different elemental spells that can take advantage of enemy weaknesses. Combat, with a few exceptions, never really capitalises on this mechanic though, with Jonathan being more versatile and more fun to use than Charlotte for the most part. You can have both characters active at the same time, where the non-controlled character will do some basic attacks on enemies near you, and you can also briefly summon them in to use their sub-weapon or spell. You unlock the ability pretty quickly to use dual item crushers, which are hugely powerful attacks that you can use and take a large chunk of your MP, and are the quickest way to dish out huge damage at once. 90% of the time though, I just ran around as Jonathan and summoned Charlotte for the odd spell or dual crush when needed, rather than choosing to play as her. The puzzles and platforming segments use the mechanic to great effect though, with certain platforming sections requiring jumping on your partner's shoulders to reach a high ledge, or having both characters push a large block. There are even a few really cool segments where you have to switch between them on bikes to avoid different obstacles. The last DS game in this collection is Order of Ecclesia, which, in my opinion, takes the ideas from the previous two games and perfects them. You play as Shanoa, a member of the Order of Ecclesia, who can absorb glyphs from enemies to use in combat. This is functionally similar to Dawn of Sorrow's Souls, but not every enemy has a glyph, and glyphs also take the place of your main weapons. Using any of these costs a small amount of mana to use, but Shanoa regenerates MP incredibly quickly. Rather than being a powerful but limited resource like in previous games, mana acts more as a stamina bar, encouraging you to think about your actions and attacks. You can equip two main glyphs that you can combo between, as well as one utility glyph that provides you with some extra traversal abilities or buffs. You can also use what's called a union glyph attack that combines the properties of your two equipped attack glyphs to perform a more powerful attack at the cost of hearts. Like Dawn of Sorrows, the game gives you equipment sets that you can switch between on the fly, but this time it gives you 3 of them. And this is incredibly important because Ecclesia takes its enemy resistances and weaknesses far more seriously than any of the previous Castlevania games. You can't just stick with one weapon type or spell type and expect to get very far. Out of all of the games in this collection, Ecclesia is easily the hardest, and may potentially be the hardest of all of the RPG Castlevania games. Enemies hit hard and require learning their weaknesses as well as their movesets to defeat. It is a lot of fun though, trying out new glyphs and combinations to see what works and what doesn't. It is a little frustrating then that while not quite as bad as Dawn of Sorrows, the drop rate for these glyphs can be incredibly low and require a lot of repetitive farming to obtain the rarer glyphs. One thing that I really enjoyed though was that some of the glyphs were hidden behind small puzzles, like having to traverse a pitch black room with spikes to get a darkness spell. I found most of these to be really clever ways of earning them. While Ecclesia may be the best from a gameplay perspective, it's probably my least favourite of the trilogy from an exploration one. I love the titular castle in Castlevania games, and I love exploring its different labyrinth-themed layouts that feel familiar but different in each title. Traversing meandering corridors to find a boss and a power-up before traipsing back to use that to get over an obstacle and do it all again is so great. It's a shame that it's not until 2/3 of the way through Ecclesia do you actually get this experience. The first 2/3 are full of short, disconnected levels that you play through. These harken back to the original Castlevania game somewhat, giving linear maps with some secrets, but I never felt that these are as fun to travel through. One of the maps is literally a straight line. When you finally get to the castle, it's so good too. A small maze of block pathways, interesting locales, and some really cool boss fights, but it all feels a lot hollow after going through such a linear experience first. Portrait of Ruin has a similar, albeit less expansive issue. Although you do start in Dracula's castle, you don't stay there for very long. Portrait of Ruin's big gimmick is that you have to enter paintings to weaken the vampire Browner before you can defeat his hold on Dracula's castle. These paintings will transport you to different locations, the streets of a town, some pyramids in the desert, and a twisted circus, to name just a few of them. While not quite as linear as some of Ecclesia's worst offenders, these paintings could have benefited from being a bit more fleshed out, with more secrets and backtracking to do. I also wish there had been more paintings, as the second set of 4 that you have to enter in the path to the true ending are just remixed versions of the first portraits that you enter. Unlike Ecclesia though, I felt like these more linear stage experiences actually added to the game because they were sandwiched in between sections of exploring the castle rather than being in the way of it, even if the castle itself was pretty weak comparatively. This leads me back to Dawn of Sorrow, which is solely contained in the castle. It's a huge map, and such a well crafted one at that. The areas you travel through are unique and exciting and full of things to find and farm. If it's not obvious, I think Dawn of Sorrow has the best exploration of the 3 games, despite actually being the smallest of them, in total room number. I did enjoy what Portrait of Ruin and Ecclesia were trying to do by mixing up their exploration formula, and after 5 games following the same structure as Symphony of the Night, I can definitely understand it, but the changes never felt like they were scratching the same itch the same way Dawn of Sorrow did. The last part of the collection is the arcade game, Haunted Castle. The collection has the original from 1988, and it is incredibly tough and borderline unfair to play. You play as Simon Belmont, and you must whip your way through Dracula's castle slowly and painfully to rescue your wife that's been kidnapped. Haunted Castle Revisited, on the other hand, is much more fun. It looks incredible and feels so much smoother and easier to play than the original did. While still being tough, it felt fairer and more manageable and was actually quite a lot of fun to play through. I loved seeing all the redesigned sprites for the monsters in it, and would highly recommend it if you are a fan of classic Castlevania games. The Dominus collection is actually fantastic. Despite a few individual issues with each game, the DS trilogy of the Castlevania games is one of the series' strongest showings, and all 3 of the games are excellent. The only real issue I had with the whole collection was its absolutely boring trophy list. All you have to do to earn the Platinum Trophy for this collection, the Dominus of trophies, is finish the games. Mostly. Despite my complaining about Dawn and Ecclesia's terrible drop rates, I was stunned that there was no trophy for collecting an amount of souls and glyphs, or for levelling all of Jonathan's sub-weapons or Charlotte's spells in Portrait of Ruin. It seems strange that for a series whose main draw is finding secrets, there are no trophies for finding them. But no, just finish the game and get the true endings in each one. Not only will getting the true endings get you all of the boss trophies that you need to get, but it will also unlock the other playable characters, which you will need to do in each of the game. But thankfully, these are actually really fun. In Dawn of Sorrow, once you have beaten the boss inside the Mirror Aguni, you will learn the 5th magic seal to let you in the last room inside the Garden of Madness. Equip Mina's talisman before you enter, and you can continue on with the game and finish with the true ending. Once you've done this, this will unlock Julius mode, a mode where you play as the last Belmont himself, Julius, as well as Yoko Bernardes and Alucard. In this mode, you can switch between the 3 of them to do an extremely overpowered rush through the game, but with its own secret end boss at the end. Completing this mode will get you the A Promise Fulfilled trophy. In Portrait of Ruin, you must get the good ending to the game by finding the spell that can cure vampirism and using it on the priest Vincent. This spell is hidden in the Sandy Graves portrait and can't be obtained until you've learned the Toad Morph spell. When you have this, speak to Wind, and then when you fight the Vampire Sisters, you can cast the spell. It is easier to do this while controlling Jonathan, and have Charlotte cast it with the right shoulder button, and protecting her while she casts. If you do this successfully, you will unlock the path to the true ending. Once you have finished this, you will unlock Richter mode and Sisters mode. If you pick Richter mode, you can blitz through the game as Richter Belmont and Maria Renard. Although, to be honest, this should actually probably just be called Maria mode, as she is an absolute powerhouse and the best choice for almost every fight in the game. Richter is crazy fast though, and makes sprinting through the castle an absolute joy. Finally, in Order of Ecclesia, you must rescue all of the villagers before beating the boss in the Mystery Manor stage. If you have done this, you will unlock the castle part of the game, and be on your way to the true ending. Once you have completed this, you will unlock Albus mode, and again finishing the game with this overpowered character will earn you the Wielder of the Magic Gun Agartha trophy. All of these second playthroughs are a breeze to go through, as you start with all of your traversal abilities unlocked, so you can skip bosses or entire areas if you want to. I've always loved these unlockable modes that the Castlevania games have, as they make for such interesting remixes to the formula to make them much more open to sequence breaking and challenges. There are no trophies related to the Haunted Castle games, but considering how frustrated I found the first one, I won't complain too much about their absence. Overall, the Dominus collection is a fantastic port of some incredible games, and while I do have a clear preference for Dawn of Sorrow, it doesn't mean that the other two games are any lesser. In fact, it wouldn't be unreasonable to say that this collection makes up most of my top 5 Castlevania games. I just wish a bit more effort had been put into the game's trophy lists. But even without the trophies to spur me on, I still went and got 100% map completion in all of the games, and most of the souls and glyphs that I could be bothered to farm, because the act of filling in all those little squares is such a pleasure for me. I only wonder now, what's next for the series? Will the PS2 games get brought to modern consoles, or will we see remasters of the Lords of Shadow trilogy? I guess we'll just have to wait and see. Thanks for watching this video. I hope it gave you a good idea of what to expect in the Dominus collection and how great these games are. Please consider subscribing if you enjoyed it, and let me know what Metroidvanias you like in the comments. And until next time, happy hunting.